Right, so I've had the Harley LiveWire for a couple of weeks and I'm taking it back today, sadly, so I thought it was a good chance to wrap up my thoughts. I've been lucky enough to ride the main competition for this bike, so the Zero SRF and the Energica Rebel. And although this doesn't look like the strongest on the spec sheet, I think actually the whole package combines for a riding experience that is really, really memorable. So I'll talk through the specs first and we'll compare it to those two other bikes, take it for a spin and I'll show you what it's like on the road, and then I'll wrap up with what I liked about it and perhaps a couple of niggles, but mainly the fact that I just can't afford one at 30 grand. But before we get started, if you're new here and you want to see more electric motorcycle reviews, I try and do as many of them as possible. I also do plenty of reviews of internal combustion petrol bikes as well, so if you want to see those, please do remember to hit subscribe. Let's start off with the power on this bike. So 105 horsepower, 116 newton meters of peak torque. So not monstrous figures, but not bad either. But you have to remember when you're comparing it to petrol bike equivalents, that power is all produced right from a standstill. No need to find the right gear or rev it up. It just delivers pure meaty torque all the way up until, you know, you're getting beyond legal speeds. Electric motors can deliver all that power, like really right down low from a standstill, but it really smooths it out with the electronics. So it's a very easy bike to ride at walking speeds, even though you don't have a clutch. It just does all that smoothness on your behalf. And I've found it super easy to ride in town and at low speeds, but also there's lots of power there for accelerating up to motorway speeds. And even when you're doing 60, 70 and you need to overtake, there's still plenty there. It just absolutely flies and it feels like no effort at all because it's so quiet and smooth. The SRF makes similar power, so 110 horsepower, but it makes a lot more torque, 190 newton meters if I remember correctly, but it's the Rebel that just blows them out of the water. It's got 145 horsepower peak and then it's up over 200, I think 215 newton meters of peak torque, which is Triumph Rocket 3 territory. I think that's 221. And look, they could just throw out loads of power at the expense of range, but it's always that balance with the electric bikes. This has a 15.5 kilowatt hour battery and they reckon about 145 miles of city range, where you're getting the effects of the regen braking because it's stop-start traffic. When you're at a constant speed on the motorway and you don't have that, and there's more wind resistance as well and rolling resistance, it comes down to 70 miles. They also quote a combined figure. It says about 100 miles. Realistically, I've found that in the real world, you get about 70 or 80 miles if you're riding it hard on A and B roads. The Zero puts out similar figures, although there is an option for a power tank, I think it's called, that gives you extra range. But again, it's the Rebel with a 21.5 kilowatt hour battery, and they quote a huge city range of something like 250 miles. I didn't get a chance to test it. I found that in sort of similar real world riding, Sunday blast type thing, it had a bit more range than this. So probably about 90 or 100 miles, you know, not massively different, just that extra quarter that's reflected in the battery capacity. This does take a fast charger, so it'll do 80% charge in 40 minutes if you can find one at home, AC charge in the wall, and it'll be 10, 12 hours. And that's pretty much the same for the other bikes. I think there's a fast charge option for the Zero, but you know, if you're charging it at home, you're going to get a similar charge rate. Same with the Rebel, that definitely does take a fast charger, similar times charging at home. Most electric bikes are pretty hefty and this is no exception, so 251 kilograms. So when you compare it to a naked sports bike, most of them are under 200 kilograms now. That is a significant difference. You know, it's almost like taking a small passenger with you. But you know, this is somewhere between like the Rebel, which is 260, 270 kilograms, and the Zero's down at like 220, 230, depending on how you spec it. One of the strengths of this bike is the electronics. I think it's pretty comprehensive. So you've got lean sensitive ABS and traction control, which is competitive with any other sports naked bike, electric or otherwise. You've got a TFT dash, which is a touchscreen to administer all of those rider aids. There's plenty of rider modes, phone connectivity, so you can do music and nav. There's a voice command button here. You've got self-cancelling indicators, LED lighting, cruise control. There's plenty to go out there. The Rebel is similarly well spec'd. I think the Zero is lacking a few of those features, but certainly in terms of tech, this is super competitive. And I'd say the hardware is pretty good as well. So you've got Showa big piston, separate function forks, fully adjustable at the front, and then a fully adjustable shock from Showa at the rear as well. And then you've got Brembo 4-pot radially mounted monoblock calipers, so a bit more sporty and premium spec than you might expect for your average Harley. The other two bikes bikes are similarly spec'd in terms of suspension and brakes, but where they do differ is price. So this is 29,500 in this orange paint job. I think it's just less than 29 grand in black. The Rebel, yeah, that is 25, 26 grand. So not a million miles off this, but the Zero undercuts them both massively. For the standard version without any of the sort of range or charging add-ons, it's 17,500, I think. If you finance it, and given what you save on fuel and road tax, it actually looks quite competitive with a petrol bike, which is impressive. But this is certainly at the premium end, and so the obvious question is it worth it? So let's take it for a spin to find out.
The first thing you notice when you get on the LiveWire is the riding position is not as aggressive as you'd expect for like a sports naked bike or a petrol one anyway. All of the electric nakeds that I've tried so far have had pretty moderate seat heights of like 780 or 790 mil, whereas you might expect like 810, 820, 830 on something like a Street Triple or 890 Duke. Now I don't know if that's so you can get your feet down a standstill, because they're all a bit heavier, the electric nakeds, but it does lead to a nice relaxed riding position. I was thinking when I got on this bike, actually, it reminds me of a 1200 Roadster, the Harley. You know, like a sporty cruiser feel to it, that low seat, flat, low bars. It doesn't have the mid-position pegs on this LiveWire. They're more like a traditional rearward peg position. But it's not aggressive, it's pretty comfortable for fairly long stints in the saddle. It's so easy on this bike to end up going quicker than you ought to be, because it just feels effortless. There's no revving of the engine, there's not that sound as it starts to work hard. You do get a bit of noise from the electric motor, of course, but you know, there's not that sensation of going through the gears. Oh, I just love the way it picks up there. I've been going everywhere in sports mode. I've only got it for a couple of weeks, so I'm hardly going to be riding around trying to conserve battery. I've just been trying to enjoy it as much as I can. And yeah, the acceleration is incredible on this bike. Just twist and go. Straight up to 60, no problems. And the thing that I often forget about electrics that always blows my mind is just that acceleration from like 50 or 60, let's say you're overtaking someone on the motorway. From here, whoa, it's just as strong at that kind of speed as it is down in the, you know, 0 to 30 kind of range. In terms of what it's like on the road though, the ride is fairly firm. It feels very taut, precise, holds its line nicely, turns in nicely. It's not wallowy, it's not what you'd probably expect from a Harley. It's a lot of fun. In fact, we've had some good weather recently, and for those short 1 or 2 hour blasts where you're just looking for something that's not necessarily the most cushy, but just the one that puts a big grin on your face, I've been choosing a LiveWire over a few of the bikes I've got in the garage at the moment. I was perhaps expecting a bit more initial bite from the brakes, the Brembos. I wouldn't say it's like one finger braking, but there's loads of power there when you do squeeze them on a bit. So I guess that's by design to keep it nice and friendly on the brakes. Some people prefer that as well, and that's fair enough. It does make it easier to ride at those lower speeds, nice and smooth. Looks wet over there, so I might see if I can do a different route. You know, the cockpit can have a big impact on the riding experience of a bike, and this is probably one of the strengths of the LiveWire versus some of the other bikes on the market, the electrics, because this is the one that has the most premium and well put together feel to it. Part of that is down to the fact that you get the typical chunky Harley grips, the chunky brake levers, these mirrors as well, which are pretty decent, although they could perhaps be a bit wider out so you can see past your elbows a bit easier, but they're still decent and don't vibe around. And then the switchgear, which feels nice and robust, whereas on the Zero and the Energica the switchgear feels cheap, and that can cheapen the whole experience. This feels great and familiar if you've ridden other Harleys, of course. The TFT dash isn't massive by 2021 standards, but it's easy to navigate because it's touchscreen. So if you're at a standstill and you need to go through the menus, then that makes it quicker than using some buttons on the switchgear, but then the switchgear are well featured for it. So you've got a cycle button on the back there, there's a media joystick on the left here, and then a menu joystick on the right here. There's also a voice control button on the left here, cruise control, and then you've got your left and right indicators, traction control button, a mode button there, a kill switch, and then a starter. So there's loads of buttons on them, but it does mean that there's pretty much a dedicated switch for any function that you might need, which makes it really easy to remember what to press. And I found it very easy to get along with. Woo! I'm giving it back today, this bike, so I thought I'd come back down this hill because there's some good corners and I just want another 5 minutes of enjoying it. So if I had to sum up what it's like to ride the LiveWire, I'd say it's pretty comfy in the riding position, but still quite precise in its handling. The brakes are decent, if not particularly strong on the initial bite, but it's that torquey and silky smooth delivery that defines what this bike's like to ride on most other electrics. It's like I said, the thing that's addictive about accelerating on this bike is not just that it's fast, but that it feels absolutely effortless.
So what did I like about this bike? I think it is hands down the best looking electric motorcycle on the market. They've done a good job of balancing like modern looks with making a feature of the battery and the motor underneath there. The LED lighting, the sort of sweeping lines to it, this short tail section as well, they're super fashionable at the moment. But it also does retain a bit of Harley-ness as well. So apart from the obvious stuff like the logos and some of the parts that you'll find on other Harleys, you know, the fuel tank, or what would be the fuel tank, actually looks a bit like a Sportster, and this little fairing at the front also looks a bit like a Lowrider S or something like that. The whole stance of it is quite cruiser looking, isn't it, given that it is a sporty naked bike, and that continues into the finish as well. So the quality of the finish on this bike is better than any other electric bike I've ridden, and I think that comes from sharing the parts with premium petrol powered bikes. Some of the switchgear and stuff on the Zero and Energica feels a bit cheap, especially given what you're paying. I don't think this feels like corners have been cut anywhere. Everything feels like robust and nicely finished. There's some matte finishes, gloss finishes. As I've already said, it handles nicely. It's a pleasure to ride. It brakes fairly well. It has that addictive acceleration that you get from electric bikes. It feels fast, certainly fast enough for road speeds anyway. But you know, I think what I liked about it most was it all combined for something super memorable and almost like characterful, which is quite something for an electric bike because they do struggle for engagement a little bit. You know, there's no clutch and gears to work. You don't get a lovely exhaust note. But this, I don't know, I think it's just the way it's designed, the way it looks, the way it feels on the road. You do feel like you're riding a Harley. You do feel like you're riding something premium and also something really quite special and distinctive. You know, we're at the advent of electric motorcycles here. So this could be the start of the next phase of motorcycling. And that's quite exciting for me. So I can see why people might, if they've got the money, go for the LiveWire. In terms of downsides, there are some small niggles that could be improved here and there. I mean, the dash, I didn't find it super easy to navigate, but of course, if you own a bike, you do learn that over time and it just becomes second nature. The side stand as well on Harleys, it doesn't really like angle forward. It's perpendicular to the bike and then notches in once the bike's weight's on it. I always find that a bit unnerving, but really it's just the price that's still too high on electric bikes like this for me. And I can't wait till it comes down to a point where I can actually afford one. As always, love to hear your thoughts about the LiveWire in the comments below. I hope I've answered most of your questions. I've got a Q&A video coming this week as well, but let me know your questions down in the comments and I'll answer them down there as well. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.